"Sir, you're not allowed in first class." The words didn't shout, but they landed loud enough for the nearby passengers to turn their heads. Ethan Cole paused mid-step, his worn sneakers just inches from the plush carpet that separated Coach from something better. His daughter's small hand tightened in his, her fingers curling instinctively like she already understood the world had lines they weren't meant to cross. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, his voice calm, steady, practiced. He gave a small nod and stepped back without argument, without pride, without a scene. That was the thing about Ethan. He didn't fight to be seen. He simply chose who he was going to be, every single time. The terminal lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow over tired faces and hurried footsteps. The smell of coffee and jet fuel lingered in the air, familiar and distant at the same time. Around him, people shifted, glanced, then looked away. Some with pity, some with quiet judgment, most with nothing at all. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide but not confused, just searching. "Dad, were we supposed to sit there?" she whispered. Ethan crouched slightly, meeting her at eye level, a gentle smile pressing against the weight of the moment. "Sometimes the best seats aren't the ones people think," he said, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. She nodded, trusting him the way only a child can, completely and without question. Then it happened. A ripple just a few feet away. A woman stood near the boarding gate, her clothes simple, her posture tired but dignified. She clutched her bag close, as if it held more than just belongings. A flight attendant spoke to her with polite firmness, the kind that sounds kind but feels final. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you've been reassigned." The woman didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply nodded, her eyes lowering for just a moment before lifting again with quiet composure. That moment, small, almost invisible, caught something inside Ethan. He hesitated. One breath. Two. Then he stepped forward. "She can have my seat," he said. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, something rooted in who he was when no one was watching. The attendant blinked. "Sir, that's not necessary." Ethan shook his head gently. "It's already done." Lily looked up at him again, this time with a question she didn't speak out loud. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Because someone had to," he murmured. A few passengers nearby chuckled under their breath. "Gave up first class for that," someone muttered. Another voice followed, softer but sharper. "Man doesn't even know who he's helping." Ethan heard it. Of course he did. But he didn't turn. He didn't respond. He simply stepped back into the line, into the space he was expected to occupy. The woman met his eyes for a brief second. No words. Just a look. Deep, searching, almost like she was memorizing something she hadn't seen in a long time. Then she walked past him, toward the front of the plane. And just like that, the moment ended. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft door sealed with a soft mechanical hum, a sound that always felt like a point of no return. Ethan guided Lily down the narrow aisle, their shoulders brushing past pressed suits and impatient sighs, until they reached the back where the seats grew tighter and the space felt smaller, like the world had quietly shrunk. "Here we are," he said gently, helping her into the window seat, the one he had promised would still show her the clouds. Lily pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging it slightly as she traced a small circle with her finger. "It is still pretty," she whispered. Ethan smiled, settling beside her, his knees slightly cramped, his posture relaxed in a way that came from years of choosing peace over comfort. Around them, conversations buzzed in low tones, fragments of business deals, weekend plans, complaints about delays. No one was talking about what had just happened. No one ever did. But the silence around kindness was different. It lingered. A flight attendant passed by, her expression neutral, but her eyes lingering just a second longer on Ethan, as if trying to understand something she could not quite name. "Sir, can I get you anything before takeoff?" she asked. "Just some water for her, please," Ethan replied, nodding toward Lily. "Of course." 3 short sentences. Polite. Simple. Then quiet again. The plane began to taxi, a slow, steady movement that pressed them gently into their seats. Lily reached for his hand. "Dad, do you think she was scared?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced down at her, then toward the front of the plane, though he could not see that far. "Maybe," he said. "People get scared when they feel alone." Lily nodded, thinking about that, her small fingers tightening around his. But she was not alone, she said after a moment. Ethan did not answer right away. He just looked at her, something warm and heavy settling in his chest. No, he said quietly. She was not. The engines roared louder, the runway rushing beneath them, and then the lift, that familiar weightlessness that made everything feel suspended for just a second longer than expected. Outside the window, the ground pulled away, shrinking into patterns and lines, until it all looked quiet again from above. Inside, the cabin settled into a rhythm. Seatbelts loosened. Trays clicked. Voices softened. And still, Ethan remained just another passenger in the back, unnoticed, unchanged. Or so it seemed. A few rows ahead, someone leaned into the aisle, whispering just loud enough to carry. Guy gave up a first-class seat like it was nothing. Another voice replied, almost amused. Some people just do not think ahead. Ethan heard it, the words drifting back like echoes in a hollow room. He did not react. He simply adjusted Lily's seatbelt, smoothing it across her lap with careful hands. Comfortable, he asked. She nodded, her eyes already drifting between the clouds and him. Yes, Dad. 2 sentences. Soft. Steady. Then a pause. The kind that holds something unseen. Up front, behind a closed cockpit door, a quiet conversation unfolded that no one in the cabin could hear. A name spoken once. Then again. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just certain. Back in seat 34B, Ethan leaned his head back, closing his eyes for a brief moment, as if resting between chapters of a story he never expected to be part of. And somewhere above the steady hum of the engines, just before the seatbelt sign flickered off, a voice reached for a microphone, ready to turn a quiet act into something no one on that plane would forget. The seatbelt sign chimed softly, a small ding that barely cut through the low hum of the engines. But something else followed it. Something different. Something that did not belong to routine. A pause. Then a click. The intercom crackled to life, and the entire cabin shifted in that subtle way people do when they sense something unexpected. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot's voice came through, calm but carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. This is your captain speaking. Conversation slowed. A few heads turned. Someone stopped mid-sentence. Before we continue to cruising altitude, we have a moment we would like to recognize. 3 short sentences. Simple. Controlled. Then silence, stretching just long enough to pull every ear closer. Ethan did not move. He kept his eyes on Lily, who was tracing shapes in the clouds, unaware that the air around them was beginning to change. There is a passenger on board today, the voice continued, who reminded us what character looks like when no one is watching. A ripple moved through the cabin now, quiet but undeniable. People glanced at each other, curious, uncertain. Ethan's brow tightened slightly, not from suspicion, but from habit, the instinct to stay unnoticed. Mr. Ethan Cole, the pilot said, clear and steady, we would like to thank you. The name hung in the air like something physical. Solid. Unavoidable. Ethan froze. Lily looked up instantly, her eyes wide. Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Around them, heads turned fully now. Not quick glances. Not passing curiosity. Full attention. A man across the aisle leaned forward. A woman a few rows back straightened in her seat. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was filled with realization. Earlier today, the pilot continued, you gave up your seat without hesitation, without knowing who would receive it, and without expecting anything in return. 2 sentences. Measured. Respectful. Then a breath. That kind of grace does not go unnoticed. Ethan swallowed, his hand instinctively tightening around the armrest, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something unfamiliar. He had spent years doing the right thing in silence. He had never expected that silence to speak back. A flight attendant appeared at the end of the aisle, her posture different now, her expression softened with something close to respect. She began walking toward him, each step drawing more eyes, more attention, more understanding. The whispers started, low and scattered. That is him. No way. That is the guy from earlier. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for just a second before lifting again, steady, grounded. Lily squeezed his hand, a small smile forming on her lips, not because of the attention, but because she understood something others were just beginning to see. The intercom clicked again, and the pilot's voice returned, quieter this time, but somehow even more powerful. "Sir, someone would like to thank you in person." And at that moment, from the front of the plane, a figure stepped into the aisle, walking toward him with calm, deliberate steps, and every single person watching suddenly realized they had been wrong about more than just a seat. She walked slowly down the aisle, and this time, no one looked away. The same woman who had stood quietly at the gate now moved with a calm authority that shifted the entire cabin without a single word. Her posture was straight, her steps measured, and the simple clothes she wore no longer looked ordinary. They looked intentional. Ethan watched her approach, his expression steady but searching, as if he was trying to place something that did not quite fit. Lily leaned closer to him, her voice soft but filled with wonder. "Dad, that is her." Ethan nodded once. "I know." 3 words. Quiet. Grounded. Then silence. The woman stopped beside his row, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the space between them. The hum of the engines faded into the background. The whispers disappeared. Even the light through the small, oval windows felt still. She smiled, not wide, not performative, but genuine, the kind of smile that comes from recognition rather than obligation. "You gave up your seat," she said, her voice calm, steady, unmistakably composed. Ethan shifted slightly, not uncomfortable, just aware. "It was just a seat," he replied. "Anyone would have done it." A pause. Then her eyes softened, just a fraction. "No," she said quietly. "Not anyone." 2 sentences. Simple. Honest. Then a breath. A flight attendant stepped closer, standing just behind her, her posture now formal, almost protective, as if the space around this woman carried a different kind of weight. Passengers leaned in, not obviously, but enough to listen, enough to witness. The woman turned slightly, just enough for her voice to carry beyond Ethan's row. "There are moments," she said, "when people show you exactly who they are, not when it is easy, not when it is expected, but when it costs them something." Her gaze returned to Ethan, steady, unwavering. "You chose kindness anyway." Ethan did not respond right away. He glanced at Lily, then back at her, his expression unchanged, but something behind his eyes had shifted. Not pride, not surprise, something quieter, something deeper. "She needed it more," he said simply. 3 words. Clear, final, then stillness. The woman exhaled softly, as if that answer confirmed something she had already begun to believe. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am." No hesitation, no curiosity, just truth. A faint smile touched her lips again, this time with something almost reflective. "That might be why this matters," she said. Then she straightened slightly, and the shift was immediate. Subtle, but undeniable. The kind of shift that moves through a room without needing explanation. The flight attendant beside her lowered her gaze just a fraction. A man across the aisle sat up straighter. Someone further back stopped recording on their phone, suddenly unsure of what they were witnessing. The woman extended her hand toward Ethan, not as a gesture of power, but of acknowledgement. "My name is Clara Hayes," she said. A few gasps, barely contained. A whisper, sharper than the rest. "Hayes, like the airline?" Another voice, almost disbelieving. "That is the Hayes." Ethan blinked once, the name settling in, not with shock, but with understanding. Lily looked between them, her eyes wide, sensing the weight even if she did not fully grasp it. Clara held his gaze, steady, calm, certain. "And today," she added softly, "you reminded me why this company exists at all." The cabin fell into a deeper silence then, not forced, not awkward, but earned, as every assumption, every quiet judgment from earlier began to dissolve in the presence of something far more powerful than status. The silence did not break right away. It deepened, stretching across rows of passengers who only moments ago had been whispering, judging, deciding what kind of man Ethan Cole was without ever knowing him. Now those same eyes held something different, something quieter, something closer to respect. Clara Hayes did not rush the moment. She let it breathe, let it settle, as if she understood that truth does not need to be forced when it is finally seen. Ethan slowly reached out and shook her hand, his grip firm but unassuming, the same way he had greeted every person in his life, without calculation, without expectation. "I did not know," he said simply. Clara nodded once. "I know," she replied. 3 words. Gentle. Certain. Then a pause that carried more meaning than anything louder ever could. Lily looked up at Clara, her small voice breaking the stillness in a way that felt natural, not disruptive. "Are you important?" she asked, her tone curious, not impressed. A few passengers let out quiet breaths, unsure whether to smile or remain still. Clara's expression softened in a way that no boardroom ever saw. Something human, something unguarded. She crouched slightly to meet Lily at eye level. "Not as important as being kind," she answered. 2 sentences. Honest. Clear. Then stillness again. Ethan watched that exchange closely, not protective, not tense, just present, as if measuring something deeper than status or recognition. Around them, the cabin shifted once more. A man who had laughed earlier now looked down at his hands. A woman who had whispered leaned back into her seat, her expression thoughtful. Even the flight attendant who had redirected Ethan before now stood a little straighter, her posture carrying quiet humility. Clara rose back to her full height, her presence filling the narrow aisle without effort. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying just enough for others to hear. "We do not build companies for profit alone. We build them to reflect something greater." Ethan held her gaze, steady, grounded. "Then you are doing it right," he said. No hesitation, no flattery, just truth. Clara studied him for a moment, as if that answer mattered more than any report she had ever read. Then she turned slightly, addressing the cabin, not with authority, but with clarity. "Today, this man reminded all of us that character is not measured by where you sit, but by what you give up for someone else." The words settled over the passengers like a quiet weight, not heavy, but undeniable. No one spoke. No one needed to. The truth had already done its work. A flight attendant stepped forward, her voice softer now, respectful. "Mr. Cole, we would like to move you and your daughter to first class." A few heads nodded in agreement. Someone murmured, "He deserves it." Another voice followed, quieter, "He always did." Ethan glanced at Lily, then back at Clara, his expression unchanged, but thoughtful. He took a slow breath, as if considering something beyond comfort, beyond recognition. "Thank you," he said carefully. "But we are fine where we are." 3 sentences. Calm. Certain. Then silence. The kind that makes people sit up a little straighter, think a little deeper. Clara did not react immediately. She simply watched him, something like admiration flickering behind her composed exterior. Because in that moment, it was not the seat that defined him. It was the fact that even now, when the world had finally turned to look at him, he still chose to remain exactly who he had always been. Clara did not speak immediately, and that silence carried more weight than any applause could have filled. She studied Ethan for a long second, not as a CEO evaluating a decision, but as a person recognizing something rare, something that could not be trained, bought, or manufactured. Around them, the cabin remained still, suspended in that fragile space where people begin to question themselves. A flight attendant shifted her weight slightly, unsure whether to insist or step back. A man across the aisle cleared his throat, but said nothing. Even the low hum of the engines felt softer, as if the aircraft itself was listening. Clara finally exhaled, slow and measured. "You turned down comfort twice," she said quietly. "Most people do not even realize they have the chance once." Ethan gave a small shrug, not dismissive, just honest. "Comfort is not always the point," he replied. 3 words. Calm. Grounded. Then stillness. Lily leaned into his side, her head resting gently against his arm, her eyes moving between the 2 adults as if she was watching something she would remember long after this flight. Clara glanced at her, and something shifted again, something more personal, more human. "You are raising her well," she said. Ethan looked down at Lily, his expression softening just enough to reveal what he rarely showed. "She is teaching me," he answered. 2 sentences. Simple. True. Then a breath. Clara nodded, as if that answer confirmed a belief she had not yet put into words. Behind her, another flight attendant approached, this one holding a small tablet, her voice low but urgent. "Ma'am, the board is already asking about the announcement." Clara did not look back. "They can wait," she said. 3 words. Firm. Final. Then silence again, the kind that does not ask permission. A few passengers exchanged glances, recognizing now that this moment was not part of any script, not a gesture for show, but something unfolding in real time. Clara turned back to Ethan, her posture shifting slightly, less formal now, more direct. There are people who perform kindness when it is visible, she said. And there are people who live it when it is not. Her eyes held his. You did not know anyone was watching. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. That is the point, he said. A pause followed, deeper this time, as if the entire cabin had reached the same conclusion at once. The whispers were gone now. The judgment had nowhere left to stand. In its place was something quieter, something heavier, something closer to respect. Clara straightened slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice carried not just to Ethan, but to everyone within earshot. Then allow me to do something in return, she said. A few heads lifted. A man leaned forward. Someone in the back adjusted their seat just to listen better. Ethan did not react right away. He simply waited, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. Clara continued, her tone measured but intentional. Not because you expect it, she added, but because moments like this deserve to be honored properly. Lily looked up again, her eyes wide with quiet curiosity. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, grounding her, grounding himself. The cabin held its breath, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that subtle way people do when they know something important is about to happen. And for the first time since the plane left the ground, Ethan felt it too. Not the attention, not the recognition, but the shift, the quiet turning of something that had always been invisible, now beginning to take shape in front of everyone. Clara let the silence hold for one more breath. Then she took a small step closer, not to dominate the space, but to meet Ethan where he stood. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice steady, I would like to offer you something that goes beyond a seat. A few passengers leaned in again, the curiosity returning, but quieter now, more respectful. Ethan did not shift. He did not lean forward. He simply listened. A position, Clara continued, within this company. A role where decisions are shaped by people who understand what it means to put others first. 3 sentences. Clear. Intentional. Then a pause. The words moved through the cabin like a low wave, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Someone whispered, Is she serious? Another voice answered, softer, She never jokes. Lily looked up at her father, her eyes wide, searching his face for a reaction she had rarely seen before. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries years of quiet choices behind it. I appreciate that, he said carefully, but I already have a job. Clara tilted her head slightly, not surprised, just curious. What do you do? She asked. Ethan gave a small, almost shy smile. I fix things, he replied. Cars mostly. Sometimes whatever people cannot afford. To replace. 3 sentences. Simple. Honest. Then stillness. Clara absorbed that, not as information, but as something deeper, something that aligned with everything she had just witnessed. And when you fix them, she asked, do you charge what they owe? Ethan shook his head gently. I charge what they can carry. A quiet murmur spread again, but this time it was different. Not disbelief. Not judgment. Recognition. Clara nodded slowly, as if a missing piece had just fallen into place. Then you already understand more about leadership than most people in my boardroom, she said. Ethan looked down for a moment, not out of humility, but out of habit, the kind that comes from a life where praise is rare and unnecessary. I'm just trying to get my daughter where she needs to go, he said. Lily squeezed his hand at that, her smile small but proud. Clara followed the gesture, her eyes softening again. And where is that? She asked. Ethan hesitated, just a fraction longer this time. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because some truths carry weight when spoken out loud. A children's hospital, he said quietly. She has an appointment in the morning. The cabin shifted again, but not with surprise this time. With understanding. The kind that settles deep and does not leave quickly. Clara's posture changed, almost imperceptibly, but enough to show that this was no longer just about a gesture on a plane. Then this flight matters more than I realized, she said softly. Ethan met her gaze again, steady as ever. They all do, he replied. A pause followed, longer now, heavier, filled with everything that had not been said but was finally understood. Clara straightened, her voice returning to that calm authority, but now layered with something more personal. Then allow me to make sure you arrive exactly where you need to be, she said. The cabin held its breath again, not because of what she might give, but because of what this moment had already revealed about the man sitting quietly in seat 34B, who had never once asked for anything in return. Clara did not move right away, but when she did, it was with purpose, the kind that shifts outcomes rather than just moments. She turned slightly toward the nearest flight attendant, her voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Contact ground operations," she said. "I want a direct transfer arranged upon landing. No delays." The attendant nodded quickly, already tapping on her tablet, her earlier hesitation replaced with precision. Around them, the passengers listened in a different way now, not out of curiosity, but out of respect for something unfolding that felt real. Ethan watched quietly, his posture unchanged, his hand still resting lightly on Lily's shoulder, as if anchoring both of them in place. "You do not have to do that," he said, his voice low but steady. Clara turned back to him, her expression soft but certain. "I know," she replied. "That is why it matters." 3 sentences. Simple. Final. Then a pause that carried weight. Lily looked between them again, her small voice cutting gently through the moment. "Are we going to the hospital faster?" she asked. Clara crouched slightly once more, meeting her at eye level, her tone warm, almost protective. "Yes," she said. "Faster, and without worry." Lily smiled, a small, quiet smile that did not ask for more than that. Ethan noticed it, and for the first time since the flight began, something in his shoulders eased, just a fraction, just enough to show that this was not about him anymore. Clara stood again, her gaze returning to Ethan, more direct now. "There is a car waiting when we land," she said. "It will take you straight there. And the hospital has already been notified." Ethan blinked once, the information settling in slowly, not as a surprise, but as something he was not used to accepting. "You did all that just now?" he asked. Clara gave a small nod. "Some things should not wait," she answered. 2 sentences. Clear. Certain. Then stillness. The cabin remained quiet, but the silence had changed again. It was no longer heavy with judgment or curiosity. It was filled with something softer, something that felt like understanding shared across strangers. A man who had spoken earlier leaned back into his seat, his expression thoughtful. A woman across the aisle folded her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed forward, as if reflecting on something personal. The flight attendant returned, her voice low but composed. "Everything is arranged," she said. Clara acknowledged her with a slight nod, then looked back at Ethan. "You gave without knowing," she said. "Now let someone give back without asking." Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes when resistance meets something genuine. He looked at Lily, then back at Clara, his voice quieter now, but no less steady. "Thank you," he said. 3 words. Honest. Grounded. Then a pause. Clara studied him for a moment longer, as if committing something to memory, not his face, not his name, but the way he carried himself when no one expected anything from him. Then she stepped back, not retreating, but allowing the moment to settle where it belonged. The cabin remained still as she turned and walked toward the front again, her presence no longer questioned, no longer misunderstood. And as she disappeared beyond the curtain, the quiet that followed was not empty. It was full of something rare, something that had started with a single choice, and was now changing far more than just the direction of a flight. The cabin slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but nothing felt the same anymore. Conversations resumed in softer tones, as if people were careful not to disturb what had just taken place. Ethan leaned back slightly, his eyes resting on the faint reflection in the window, where clouds stretched endlessly beneath them like a calm, white ocean. Lily shifted closer, her head still resting against his arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, are we okay?" she asked. Ethan turned his head, looking down at her with that same steady calm she had always known. "We have always been okay," he said. 3 words. Gentle. Certain. Then a pause. Lily nodded, her small hand finding his again, her fingers wrapping around his like it was the most natural thing in the world. Around them, something subtle began to change. A man across the aisle, the same one who had laughed earlier, leaned forward slightly. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. Ethan looked up, meeting his eyes without judgment. I did not mean what I said. Before," the man continued. "I was wrong." 3 sentences. Uneven. Honest. Then silence. Ethan gave a small nod, not dramatic, not dismissive. "It is all right," he replied. "No lecture." No correction, just acceptance. The man leaned back, exhaling as if something heavy had just lifted from his chest. A woman a few rows ahead turned in her seat, offering a small, respectful smile. Another passenger gave a quiet nod. No applause, no spectacle, just recognition, the kind that stays longer. A flight attendant approached again, this time slower, more intentional. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "if you need anything at all during the rest of the flight, please let us know." Ethan shook his head gently. "We are fine," he answered. 2 sentences. Simple. Then stillness. But this time, the stillness felt different. Not empty. Not uncertain. It felt settled. The kind of quiet that follows when something true has been seen and accepted. Lily looked out the window again, her eyes tracing the horizon where the sky met the clouds. "It feels higher up here," she said. Ethan followed her gaze, a faint smile forming. "Maybe it is not the altitude," he replied. "Maybe it is just how it feels." 2 sentences. Soft. Reflective. Then silence. Up front, behind the curtain, Clara stood still for a moment, her hand resting lightly against the edge of a seat, her eyes distant, thoughtful. The noise of the cabin barely reached her now, not because it was quieter, but because something inside her had shifted. She had built systems, companies, structures designed to move thousands of people every day. But today, one man had reminded her what those systems were meant to serve. Not efficiency, not status, but people, real people, with quiet dignity. A flight attendant approached her carefully. "Ma'am, the board is asking for a statement," she said. Clara did not turn right away. When she did, her voice was calm, but different now. "Tell them it has already been made," she said. 3 words. Clear. Final. Then a pause. Back in seat 34B, Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment, not out of exhaustion, but out of peace. The kind that does not come from what you receive, but from knowing you did not change who you are when it mattered most. And as the plane continued its steady path across the sky, something unseen had already arrived long before they reached the ground. The aircraft began its slow descent, a gentle shift that pressed softly against the body, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. The captain's voice returned, routine this time, announcing altitude and weather, but the cabin no longer heard it the same way. Something had already changed long before the wheels would ever touch the ground. Ethan opened his eyes as the plane tilted slightly, the sunlight shifting across Lily's face. She blinked, then looked up at him with a quiet kind of certainty. "We are going to make it on time," she said. Ethan gave a small nod, his voice calm as ever. "We are," he replied. 3 words. Steady. Grounded. Then silence. Around them, passengers began to gather their belongings. The soft click of seatbelts, the rustle of bags, the quiet shuffle of movement. But every now and then, someone would glance back at seat 34B, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of something deeper. A quiet acknowledgement. The man across the aisle gave Ethan a final nod. A woman further back offered a small smile. No one said much. They did not need to. Up front, Clara stood once more near the aisle, her posture composed, but her attention focused. She was not watching the cabin as a whole. She was watching one row, one man, one choice that had echoed further than any announcement could carry. A flight attendant approached her again, this time with a softer tone. "The car is waiting at gate C17, she said. "Security has cleared a direct path." Clara nodded once. "Good," she replied. 2 words. Certain. Then stillness. The wheels lowered beneath the aircraft with a distant mechanical hum, and the cabin grew quieter again, the kind of quiet that comes just before arrival, when everyone is caught between where they have been and where they are going. Lily leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, her voice soft but filled with something stronger than before. "Dad, I am not scared anymore," she said. Ethan turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "You were brave the whole time," he answered. 3 words. Gentle. True. Then a pause. The plane touched down, a smooth contact with the runway, followed by the steady roll forward. No applause. No reaction. Just movement. But inside that cabin, something had already landed long before. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, the usual impatience did not rise the way it normally would. No one rushed to stand. No one pushed forward. It was as if the entire space had learned something about waiting, about giving room, about choosing a different pace. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime, and people slowly stood, reaching for their bags, but carefully now, aware of the space around them. Clara stepped into the aisle again, but this time she did not speak. She simply waited. Ethan remained seated, helping Lily with her small backpack, making sure everything was in place before standing. The aisle ahead began to clear, not because it was faster, but because people stepped aside, one by one, quietly, intentionally. The man who had laughed earlier moved back, giving Ethan space to pass. The woman near the window shifted her bag, making room without being asked. No words, just action. Ethan took Lily's hand, stepping into the aisle, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, as if none of this had altered who he was. Clara met him there, not leading, not directing, just walking beside him. And as they moved forward together, through a path that had not existed before, the cabin remained silent, not out of shock, but out of respect for something that could not be undone, a simple act that had quietly rewritten everything it touched. The aircraft door opened with a soft release, and a breath of cooler air moved through the cabin, carrying with it the quiet signal that the journey had shifted from sky to ground. Passengers began stepping forward, but the rhythm remained different, slower, more deliberate, as if no one wanted to disturb what had settled among them. Ethan guided Lily carefully down the aisle, his hand steady in hers, his movements unhurried despite the importance of where they needed to be. Clara walked just ahead, not leading, not commanding, but clearing a path simply by being present. At the entrance of the aircraft, 2 ground staff stood waiting, their posture alert, their expressions composed. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Cole," he said respectfully, "this way, please." 3 words. Direct. Prepared. Then a pause. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of doubt, but out of habit, the instinct to decline special treatment. Lily looked up at him, her eyes calm, trusting. "It is okay," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. "All right," he said. They stepped out together, leaving behind the narrow space of the cabin and entering the wider corridor of the terminal, where the noise of the airport seemed distant, almost muted, as if this moment existed slightly outside of it. A small electric cart waited just beyond the gate, its engine humming quietly. A driver stood beside it, already holding the door open. "We will get you there in minutes," he said. Clara turned to Ethan, her expression steady, but softer now. "This part is not about convenience," she said. "It is about time." Ethan met her gaze, understanding settling in without resistance. "Thank you," he replied. 3 words. Simple, sincere, then silence. Lily climbed onto the seat, her small backpack resting on her lap, her eyes taking in everything with quiet curiosity. Ethan followed, sitting beside her, his hand resting lightly over hers. Clara stepped back slightly, allowing them the space, but remaining close enough to ensure nothing was left uncertain. The cart began to move, gliding through the terminal with a smooth, quiet motion, bypassing crowds, cutting through spaces that would have taken far longer on foot. People turned as they passed, some recognizing Clara, others simply sensing the urgency, but no one interrupted. The path remained clear. The driver spoke once more, his voice calm but efficient. "We will be at the hospital entrance in under 10 minutes. Ethan nodded, his eyes shifting briefly toward Lily, who leaned gently against him, her breathing steady, her earlier fear replaced with something quieter, something stronger. "You are doing great," he said softly. Lily smiled faintly. "So are you," she replied. 2 sentences. Light, honest, then stillness. Clara watched them for a moment longer, then stepped back completely, allowing the cart to continue without her. She did not follow. She did not need to. Some moments were not meant to be carried further, only ensured. As the cart disappeared into the flow of the terminal, Clara remained where she stood, her posture composed, her gaze distant but clear. Behind her, the airport moved as it always did, flights arriving, departures announced, lives crossing paths without pause. But something within her had shifted permanently, not because of what she had given, but because of what she had witnessed. And somewhere ahead, as Ethan and Lily moved closer to the place they needed to be, the distance between a simple act and its meaning had finally closed, not with noise, not with recognition, but with quiet dignity that required nothing more. The cart slowed as it approached the hospital entrance, the quiet hum of its motor fading into the soft sounds of automatic doors sliding open and distant voices echoing through clean, bright hallways. The air inside was different, cooler, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant and something else, something harder to name, a mix of hope and uncertainty that seemed to live in every corner. Ethan stepped down first, his movements steady but purposeful, then turned to help Lily, his hands gentle as always, as if even the smallest moment deserved care. "We are here," he said softly. 3 words. Grounding. Certain. Then a pause. Lily looked up at the building, her eyes wide but calm, not afraid anymore, just aware. "It looks big," she whispered. Ethan gave a small nod. "It is," he replied. "But you are bigger than this." 2 sentences. Quiet. Strong. Then stillness. A nurse was already waiting just inside, her posture alert but kind, as if she had been told exactly who to expect. "Lily Cole?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The nurse smiled warmly. "We have been expecting you. Come with me." 3 sentences. Clear. Prepared. Then movement. They followed her down the hallway, their footsteps soft against the polished floor, passing rooms where lives unfolded in ways no one outside could fully understand. Lily stayed close, her hand never leaving Ethan's, her trust unshaken. As they reached the check-in desk, another staff member stepped forward, holding a clipboard but not looking down at it, her attention focused fully on them. "Everything is ready," she said. "There will be no waiting today." Ethan blinked once, the words settling in slowly, not as surprise, but as something unfamiliar. "Thank you," he said quietly. 3 words. Sincere. Then silence. The woman nodded, her expression gentle. "Someone made sure of that," she replied. Ethan did not need to ask who. He already knew. Lily was guided toward a nearby room, her small steps steady, her shoulders relaxed in a way they had not been earlier. Ethan followed closely, but just before he entered, he paused for a brief second, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe. Not hesitation, not doubt, just a moment to breathe, a moment to recognize how far they had come. Inside the room, the light was soft, the space prepared, equipment ready but not overwhelming, as if someone had taken care to make it feel less like a place of fear and more like a place of healing. Lily climbed onto the bed with quiet determination, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "It is going to be okay," she said. He smiled, not because he was certain, but because she was. "It is," he answered. 2 words. Steady. True. Then stillness. Outside, the world continued as it always did, people moving, decisions being made, lives intersecting without pause. But inside that room, something had already shifted long before any treatment began. Not because of status, not because of power, but because a simple act, given without expectation, had moved through unseen spaces and reached exactly where it needed to go. And as Ethan stood beside his daughter, his presence calm, his dignity intact, the quiet truth of it all settled in fully. Some journeys are not changed by what you receive at the end, but by who you choose to be along the way. The room settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that does not rush, does not demand, but simply allows time to do its work. Machines hummed softly, steady and consistent, like a heartbeat that refused to give in to fear. Ethan sat beside Lily, his hand resting gently over hers, not holding tight, just enough to remind her he was there, that he had always been there. She looked up at him, her eyes clear, stronger now than they had been just hours before. "Dad," she said softly, "you always say we do not have to be loud to be strong." Ethan nodded, his voice calm, unwavering. "That is right." 3 words. Simple. True. Then a pause. Lily smiled faintly, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling, as if she was thinking about something bigger than the room, bigger than the moment. "I think today, you were loud without saying anything." Ethan let out a quiet breath, something close to a smile forming, not because he had been seen, but because she had understood. "Sometimes silence carries further," he replied. 2 sentences. Soft. Grounded. Then stillness. Outside the room, footsteps passed, voices echoed faintly. Life continued in its constant motion. But inside, something had already reached its destination. Not the flight, not the hospital, something deeper, something that did not need an announcement to be real. Across the city, in a quiet office overlooking the runways, Clara stood by a wide window, watching planes lift into the sky one after another, each carrying stories no one else would ever fully know. Her reflection stared back at her, composed, controlled, but different now, changed in a way no meeting or report had ever achieved. A voice came from behind her. "The board is asking if you would like to formalize what happened today," her assistant said carefully. Clara did not turn right away. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but certain. "It was already formal," she said. 3 words. "Final." Then a pause. She looked back out at the runway, her eyes following a departing aircraft as it disappeared into the horizon. "We just forgot what it looked like." 2 sentences. Quiet. Honest. Then silence. Back in the hospital room, Ethan adjusted the blanket around Lily, his movements slow, careful, as if every small action mattered. She reached for his hand again, her grip light but steady. "We are going to be okay," she said. Ethan met her gaze, not with certainty of outcomes, but with certainty of who they were. "We already are," he answered. 3 words. Gentle, certain, then stillness. And in that quiet space, where no one was watching, where no one was judging, the truth remained exactly where it had always been, unchanged by recognition, untouched by reward. Because dignity does not arrive when the world notices you. It is revealed in the moments when no one does. And sometimes, the greatest impact is not in what comes back to you, but in the silence you leave behind, the kind that makes people stop, reflect, and remember what truly matters long after the moment has passed.